Welcome back. Tonight's story is about a wedding photographer who recorded every single ceremony she ever shot, including her own 20th anniversary dinner, and found out the hard way that the centerpiece microphone picked up more than the toast. Pour the coffee, stay close. My best friend of 23 years slept with my husband on my anniversary. 2 days later, I released the audio she did not know I had. My name is Margaret Ellen Caldwell. I am 45 years old. I live in a brick house on Sunset Drive in Asheville, North Carolina, and I have photographed 311 weddings since I bought my first real camera at 22. I have a daughter in college named Hazel. I have a golden retriever named Biscuit, who is going gray around the mouth, and on the morning of October 14th, 2025, 2 days after the worst dinner of my life, I sat at my kitchen island in a robe that smelled like last night's perfume, and I pressed play on a file I had not been brave enough to open yet. The coffee had gone cold. The dog was watching me. Outside the window, the maple in the backyard was the color of a struck match, and somewhere down the street, a leaf blower was running. I remember thinking how ordinary the world sounded for a woman about to learn that the two people she loved most had been laughing at her for a year and a half. I almost did not press play. I sat there for 9 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the stove. If your gut already tells you what is coming, tell me in the comments. I want to see how many of us saw it from a mile away. I grew up in a small mountain town an hour east of Asheville, in a yellow house with a porch swing that squeaked every time the wind came down off the ridge. My father sold farm insurance, and my mother taught 4th grade for 31 years. They were not warm people, but they were predictable, and predictable is a kind of love when you are a child. The kitchen always smelled like the cheap cinnamon they put in the oatmeal. The clock above the sink had a yellow plastic rim and a tick you could hear from the hallway. Cassidy Lane moved in across the street the summer I turned 8. She had a chipped front tooth and a red bicycle with a banana seat, and she stood on my porch on her second day in town and asked if I wanted to be best friends. I said yes, the way an 8-year-old says yes, which is to say, with my whole life. For 23 years, she was my person. She was the maid of honor at my wedding to Daniel in 2003. She was in the hospital room when Hazel was born in 2006. She was the one who held my hand at my father's funeral in 2014. And she was the one who came over with a casserole the night my mother went into the nursing home. We had matching ankle tattoos. We had a code word for when we needed to be rescued from a bad date or a bad party. And the word was peaches, because we had picked peaches together one summer at her uncle's orchard and gotten so sick we could not look at a fruit bowl for a year. I tell you all of this so you understand. She was not a friend. She was the spine of my life. Daniel I met at a wedding I was second shooting in Charleston when I was 24. He was the groom's cousin. He had quiet brown eyes and the kind of hands that always smelled faintly of cedar, because he built furniture in his father's shop on the weekends. He proposed 11 months later on the pier at Folly Beach, and he cried before I did. We bought the brick house on Sunset Drive in 2005 with money from my grandmother's estate, and we filled it slowly. A blue couch, a pine table I refinished myself, a photograph above the mantel of the 3 of us, me and Daniel and Hazel, taken the summer Hazel turned 6, all 3 of us with the same crooked smile. I trusted him the way you trust the floor under your feet, which is to say, completely, which is to say, without ever thinking about it. There was a habit I had picked up in my work. I record every wedding I shoot, not video, audio. I tuck a small microphone into the centerpiece on the head table, the kind no one notices, the kind that looks like a piece of greenery. I started doing it in 2009 after a bride called me crying because she could not remember her grandfather's toast, and I realized I could give people back the words they had been too overwhelmed to hear. It became my signature. The audio file went into the gallery as a bonus, and brides cried when they listened back. I had recorded 311 weddings. I had recorded every anniversary dinner Daniel and I ever had. I never told him. It was a small ritual, just for me, a way of holding our life in my hands later when memory got soft. October 12th, 2025, our 20th anniversary. For 2 months before the dinner, Cassidy had been strange. Not unkind, just busy. She missed our Thursday wine night 3 weeks in a row. She stopped answering her phone after 9 at night. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just tired, and she laughed in a way that did not reach her eyes. I told myself she was in her 40s and her mother had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and people get quiet when they are carrying something heavy. I told myself a lot of things that fall. Then, in late September, she and Daniel got cheerful. Both of them, at the same time. They started planning the anniversary dinner together behind my back, except they told me about it like it was a gift. Cassidy was going to host it at her house. Daniel was going to handle the wine. They were going to surprise me with a slideshow of 20 years. I cried when they told me. I actually cried. I said I had the 2 best people in the world. The dread did not come until the morning of the dinner, and even then I did not know it was dread. I thought it was indigestion. The dinner was at Cassidy's house on Forest Hill Road, the gray cottage with the white shutters and the wisteria over the front door. 8 people. Me, Daniel, Cassidy, her husband Wade, my brother Jonah and his wife Renee, and 2 old friends from photography school, Marisol and Pete. The table was set with the navy linens Cassidy and I had picked out together at an estate sale 4 years earlier. There was a centerpiece of white roses and eucalyptus, and tucked inside the eucalyptus, the way I always do at the weddings I shoot, was a small green microphone the size of a thumbnail. I had put it there myself when I arrived to drop off the cake. I want you to understand something. I did not suspect anything. I put the microphone in the centerpiece the way a woman puts on her wedding ring in the morning. By habit. By love. I wanted to be able to listen back to my husband toasting me at 50, at 60, at 70. That was the whole reason. That was the only reason. The dinner was perfect. Daniel gave a toast at 7:42 p.m. He said my name 3 times, and his voice broke once. And Cassidy reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said she had never seen 2 people love each other the way Daniel and I did. I remember thinking, in that exact moment, that I was the luckiest woman in North Carolina. I left at 10:15 to drive Hazel back to her dorm in Boone. I told Daniel to stay and help Cassidy clean up. Wade had already gone home with one of his migraines. I kissed Daniel at the door. He smelled like cedar and red wine. The microphone in the centerpiece kept recording until the battery died at 1:47 a.m. I did not download the file for 2 days. That is the part I keep coming back to. I had a feeling, and I ignored it for 48 hours, because some part of me knew that whatever was on that drive was going to end my life the way I had built it. On the morning of October 14th, I finally plugged the recorder into my laptop. I made coffee. I sat at the island. Biscuit put his chin on my foot. I clicked play, and I dragged the timeline forward to 10:23 p.m., 8 minutes after I had walked out the door. The first voice I heard was Cassidy's. She was laughing. She said, "Finally." She said, "I thought she would never leave." Then I heard Daniel say her name, and the way he said it was the way he used to say mine in the first year we were married. Soft and amazed, like he could not believe she was real. I sat at that island for 4 hours. I listened to the whole file. I listened twice. If you have ever had a friend turn your life into a private joke, drop a 1 in the comments. I want to know I am not alone in this. What I learned from the recording was not just that they had slept together. I could have survived that. What I learned was that they had been doing it for 14 months. That they had a name for me. That Cassidy had picked the navy linens because she wanted to use them at her own table after she got me out of the way. That Daniel had told her about a life insurance policy I did not know existed. That they had planned to wait until Hazel graduated college and then ask for a divorce. And that they had laughed about how I would never see it coming because, in Cassidy's exact words, Margaret has always been the kind of woman who trusts the floor under her feet. She used my own line back to me, a line I had said to her once, at 26, in her kitchen, about Daniel. She had remembered it for almost 20 years and saved it for that night. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I closed the laptop and I went out to the backyard and I sat on the steps and I watched Biscuit chase a squirrel he was never going to catch. I want to tell you what I felt, but the truth is, I felt nothing. I felt the way you feel when a doctor says the word cancer and your ears stop working for a second. I felt the way you feel when the floor you have trusted your whole life turns out to be painted air. A woman walking her terrier stopped at my fence. She was a neighbor I barely knew. Her name was Eleanor Briggs, and she was 71 years old, and she had buried 2 husbands and a son. She looked at me and she said, "Honey, are you all right?" I shook my head. I could not speak. She came through the gate without asking, and she sat down on the step next to me, and she did not say a word for 11 minutes. Then she said, "Whatever it is, you do not have to decide tonight what kind of woman you want to be tomorrow. You just have to get through tonight." I told her everything. I do not know why. Maybe because she was a stranger. Maybe because she had a voice like my grandmother's. She listened with her hands folded in her lap, and when I was done, she said one thing. She said, "You have the recording. You decide who hears it. That is the only power they cannot take from you." I went back inside at sunset. I made a copy of the file. I made 3 copies. I put one on a thumb drive, and I put the thumb drive in the bottom of my camera bag, the green canvas one I had used since 2011, and I went to bed in the guest room, and I slept for 14 hours. Daniel came home the next afternoon. He kissed the top of my head and asked if I wanted Thai food for dinner. I said yes. I sat across from him at the pine table I had refinished myself, and I ate pad see ew, and I asked him about his day. He told me about a chair he was building for a client in Hendersonville. He laughed at something on his phone. He looked me in the eye, and he told me he loved me. I smiled. I said I loved him too. I had already decided what I was going to do. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. I cooked, I shot a wedding in Black Mountain, I called Cassidy and met her for lunch at our usual cafe on Biltmore Avenue, and she hugged me at the door and asked how I was holding up after my mother's last bad week, and I told her I was fine. I watched her eat a turkey sandwich. I watched her laugh at her own joke. I watched the woman who had been the spine of my life for 23 years, and I understood for the first time that I had never really known her at all. I used those 2 weeks to do 3 things. I called a lawyer named Priya Acharya, whose office was above the bookstore on Lexington. I moved $42,000 from our joint savings into an account in my name only, because Priya told me to. And I edited the audio file down to 7 minutes of the most damning sections, the parts where they named the insurance policy, and the parts where Daniel admitted he had been telling Cassidy I was depressed when I was not, so that he could set up the story he was going to tell people later about why our marriage ended. I did not edit anything in. I only took things out. Every word on that final file was real. The night before I released it, I sat in the backyard with Biscuit, and I looked up at the maple. And I thought about the 8-year-old girl on the porch swing who had said yes to a friendship with her whole life. I told her I was sorry. I told her she had been right to love that hard. The wrong was never in her. Cassidy and Wade's 20th anniversary party was on November 1st. 200 guests at the country club on Reams Creek. A live band, a custom cake, Cassidy in a green silk dress I had helped her pick out at a boutique in Charlotte the previous spring. I was invited. I RSVP'd yes. I brought my camera the way I always did at her parties, because I was the one who always took the photographs. I waited until 9:14 p.m., right after Wade's toast. I asked the band leader for the microphone. I said I had a small surprise from an old friend. Cassidy beamed. She thought I was going to give a speech. I did not give a speech. I plugged the thumb drive into the sound system the band leader had been using, and I pressed play. For 7 minutes, the country club ballroom listened to my husband and my best friend in Cassidy's kitchen on the night of October 12th, 2025. 200 people. Cassidy's parents, Wade's parents, Daniel's mother, who had driven down from Tennessee, the pastor who had married Cassidy and Wade, the pastor who had married me and Daniel. I did not watch their faces while it played. I watched Cassidy's mother, who had been the closest thing I had to a mother of my own since mine went into the nursing home, and I watched her hand go up to her mouth and stay there. When the recording ended, the room was so quiet I could hear the ice in someone's glass. I took the microphone back from the band leader. I looked at Cassidy across the dance floor. She was the color of paper. Wade was holding the edge of a table. I said only one thing. I said, "Cassidy, you were right. I have always been the kind of woman who trusts the floor under her feet. I came tonight to show you what happens when she finds out it was painted air." Then I walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not cry. I put my camera bag on the passenger seat of my Subaru, and I drove home with the windows down, and the November air smelled like wood smoke and apples, and Biscuit was waiting at the door, and I sat on the kitchen floor with him for an hour without turning on the lights. If you have stayed with me until now, thank you. Tell me in the comments what part of the story stayed with you the most. The divorce papers were filed by Priya at 9 the next morning. Daniel had moved out by Wednesday. Cassidy's mother called me on Thursday and asked if she could come over. And she sat at my pine table and she cried. And she said she was so sorry. And she said she did not know what kind of daughter she had raised. I held her hand. I told her none of it was hers to carry. On the drive back from the courthouse the day the divorce was final, I talked to the little girl on the porch swing. I told her that being betrayed by people you loved with your whole life does not mean you loved wrong. It means they were smaller than your love, and that is their tragedy, not yours. I told her that the trust she gave Cassidy at 8 years old was not a mistake. It was a gift. And the people who turn a gift into a weapon are the ones who lose, no matter how long it takes the world to catch up. I am 45 years old. I live in a brick house on Sunset Drive in Asheville. I am still a wedding photographer, and I still tuck a small microphone into the centerpiece on every head table because the brides deserve to remember the words they were too happy to hear. Some floors are painted air, some are not. You learn to test them. You learn to walk anyway.